Growing up in that old Victorian house on Elm Street felt like living in a storybook where the pages kept turning darker with each chapter. My father, Richard, was the kind of man who commanded rooms without trying, tall, broad-shouldered, with a laugh that echoed through the halls and a wallet that seemed bottomless for his only daughter, me, Elena. Mom passed when I was 5, breast cancer that came fast and left even faster, and Dad threw himself into work as a real estate developer to fill the void, building an empire of high-rises and suburban enclaves that paid for my private schools, horse riding lessons, and summers at the lake house where we'd fish until sunset and talk about everything from stars to stock markets. He wasn't perfect, long hours meant missed recitals sometimes, but his love was fierce, unwavering, the kind that made me feel like the center of his universe. Then came Vivian, the stepmom who slithered into our lives like fog off the river. She was Dad's secretary first, all sharp suits and sharper smiles, 20 years his junior with ambitions that matched his bank account. They married when I was 12, a lavish affair at the country club where I stood in an itchy bridesmaid dress forcing smiles for photos while Vivian cooed about how we'd be such good friends. At first it seemed okay. She organized family trips, redecorated the house in sleek modern lines that erased Mom's cozy antiques, even enrolled me in ballet classes because every girl should be graceful. But cracks appeared early. She'd critique my outfits with backhanded compliments like, that dress is cute, but maybe something slimmer next time, or hover during Dad's and my movie nights until she became the star of every conversation. By high school the tension simmered, Vivian pushing for boarding school to broaden my horizons, Dad vetoing it because he couldn't bear me gone, her subtle digs about my cleanliness when I spent weekends with him instead of parties. College came as a relief. I chose a state university 3 hours away, majoring in business like Dad, calling him every Sunday for advice on classes or boys or life. Vivian answered sometimes, voice to Karen as she passed the phone, but I heard the edge, the impatience. Dad's health declined subtly at first. High blood pressure, skipped checkups and the deals that kept him traveling. But when the heart attack hit at 65, it was a thunderclap. I was in my senior year, cramming for finals, when Vivian called. Not Dad, never Dad anymore. Her tone clipped. Your father's in the hospital? Come if you can. I drove through the night, arriving to find him in ICU, tubes snaking everywhere. Vivian at his bedside holding his hand like a trophy. He's stable? She said without looking up. But the doctors say it's serious. I stayed for days, sleeping in the waiting room chair, bringing him his favorite magazines when he woke, listening to his weak jokes about beating this and taking me on a graduation trip to Europe. Vivian tolerated me. Barely. Arranging hotel rooms for herself while I camped out, whispering to nurses about family only when I lingered too long. Dad rallied briefly, enough to go home under strict rest orders, and those weeks felt like borrowed time. Morning coffees in his study where we'd pore over old photo albums, him reminiscing about Mom's laugh, my first steps, the empire he'd built for you, kiddo. Vivian hovered always, interrupting with meds or calls from work, her smiles tight as piano wire. Then the second attack came, fatal this time, in the middle of the night while I was back at school, finishing exams. Vivian's call woke me at dawn. He's gone. The funeral's Friday. Arrangements are made. I packed blindly, tears blurring the highway as I drove home, mind reeling with grief and questions. Why hadn't she called sooner? Why the rush? Arriving at the house felt like stepping into a museum. Vivian had already cleared Dad's study of personal items, photos of me and Mom replaced by generic art, his desk bare except for her laptop. We need to focus on moving forward, she said when I asked, her black dress impeccable, eyes dry. The funeral loomed. I helped with details, flowers, eulogies, guest lists, but Vivian controlled everything, choosing a closed casket to remember him strong, selecting hymns he'd have hated. Thursday night, the wake at home, mourners milling with condolences, Vivian playing the grieving widow perfectly, dabbing non-existent tears, accepting hugs from Dad's business partners. I stood in the corner numb until she pulled me aside in the kitchen. About tomorrow, she said, voice low and final. I've decided it's best if you don't attend. The words landed like a slap. I stared, disbelieving. What? It's my father's funeral. She crossed her arms, expression pitying but firm. Elena, you're not family. Not really. You were his daughter from before, but this is about us. His wife, his life here. Your presence would just complicate things. Remind everyone of the past. Rage boiled up, hot and choking. I'm his daughter, his only child. I belong there more than anyone. Vivian's smile was cold, condescending. Legally, perhaps. But emotionally, this house, this life, it was ours. You were always the outsider, clinging to old memories. Stay home tomorrow. Grieve privately. It's kinder that way. I argued, voice rising until heads turned in the living room, but she shut me down, threatening to call security if I showed up, her control absolute now that Dad was gone. That night, I paced my childhood bedroom, walls still papered with faded posters from my teen years, tears falling as memories crashed over me. Dad teaching me to ride a bike in the driveway, Christmas mornings with hot cocoa and too many gifts, late night talks about taking over the business someday. How had it come to this? Vivian barring me from saying goodbye. Sleep evaded me. Dawn broke gray and heavy. Friday morning, I dressed in black anyway, simple dress, Mom's pearl necklace for strength, and drove to the church despite her edict, heart pounding as I parked in the back lot. Mourners streamed in, colleagues, friends, distant relatives, but Vivian stood at the entrance like a sentinel, spotting me immediately. She strode over, face twisted in fury. I told you not to come. Leave now, or I'll have you removed. Humiliation burned. Heads turned. Whispers started. "He's my father," I hissed. "You can't stop me." But she could. Two ushers appeared at her signal, flanking me gently but firmly. "Ma'am, please don't make a scene." I backed away, tears blinding, driving home in a haze of grief and rage, collapsing on the living room couch where Dad used to read his paper. The will reading was scheduled for Monday. Vivian had arranged it at the lawyer's office, immediate family only. But Dad's attorney, Mr. Hargrove, insisted I attend via phone if needed. She relented grudgingly, texting the address with a curt prompt. Those days blurred in isolation. I wandered the house alone while Vivian handled estate matters, locking Dad's office and changing codes on the safe. Monday arrived crisp and clear. I drove to Hargrove's office downtown, a sleek high-rise Dad had developed years ago. Vivian was already there, perched in the waiting room like a queen on her throne, black veil dramatic even now. She ignored me completely as we were ushered into the conference room. Polished table, leather chairs, Hargrove at the head with a thick folder. "Thank you for coming," he said gravely. "Richard left specific instructions. We'll begin." Vivian leaned forward, expectant. I sat rigid, bracing for whatever scrap she'd allow me. Hargrove cleared his throat, opened the will, and read the first line aloud. "I, Richard Thomas Hale, being of sound mind and body, hereby bequeath the majority of my estate to my beloved daughter, Elena Marie Hale." The room went still. Vivian's face drained of color, her gaze sharp as a knife. Hargrove continued, but the words blurred. "Houses, investments, the business." All to me, with Vivian getting only a modest allowance and the lake house as a gesture of goodwill. She stood abruptly, chair scraping. "This is a mistake." "He wouldn't." Hargrove met her eyes calmly. "It's verified. Dated 6 months ago after his first heart attack, he was clear. Elena is his heir. You were an addition, not the center." The revelation hit like sunlight after storm. Dad had seen her, known her ambitions, protected me even from the grave. Vivian stormed out in tears, slamming the door, while I sat stunned, grief mixing with vindication. The empire was mine, but more than that, his love was, written in ink no one could erase. Looking back, that moment reshaped everything, but the real story was just beginning as Vivian's mask cracked wide open. The drive home from the lawyer's office felt longer than the 3 hours it actually took. The city skyline shrinking in the rearview mirror while my mind replayed Hargrove's words on a loop. To my beloved daughter, Elena Marie Hale. Vivian had stormed out before the full reading concluded, her heels clicking furiously down the marble hallway, leaving a wake of stunned silence and the faint scent of her expensive perfume. Hargrove had continued calmly, detailing the trust set up for my education and future business ventures. The controlling interest in Hale developments transferred directly to me upon my 25th birthday. 2 years from now, with interim management by a board Dad had handpicked years earlier, people loyal to him, not her. Vivian received the lake house outright, a monthly stipend sufficient for comfortable living, and nothing else. No shares, no voting rights, no say in the company that had been Dad's lifeblood. "He was explicit," Hargrove said, sliding the document across the table for my signature on receipt. "He wanted you protected, Elena. From everything." I signed with numb fingers, the pen scratching louder than it should have in that quiet room, then drove straight to the house on Elm Street, the one Vivian still occupied, technically hers until probate cleared but never truly hers in spirit. The front door was unlocked when I arrived. She'd left it ajar like an invitation to confrontation. Inside, the house smelled of lemon polish and grief. Furniture rearranged slightly, Dad's favorite armchair already gone, replaced by a sleek modern sectional that looked cold against the warm oak floors. Vivian stood in the kitchen, back to me, pouring wine into a glass with hands that shook just enough to spill a drop. She didn't turn when I spoke. "You knew. It wasn't a question." She took a long sip before answering. "I suspected. He changed lawyers 6 months ago after the first attack. Stopped discussing business with me. Started locking his study again." Her laugh was brittle. "I thought it was paranoia from the medication. Turns out it was clarity." I stepped closer, anger rising steady now that shock had worn off. "You barred me from his funeral. You told me I didn't belong. And all along you knew he'd left everything to me." She finally turned. Eyes red but dry, makeup still perfect. "I thought if I kept you away, if I controlled the narrative, the memories, the people who mattered, maybe the will would reflect reality. That I was his partner. His present. Not some relic from a life before me. The admission hung between us, raw and ugly. You erased Mom's photos. You pushed me out of conversations. You made me feel like an intruder in my own home." Vivian set the glass down carefully. "I was building something. A family. With him. You were always the reminder that I came second. After her, after you. I thought time would change that. I was wrong." Silence stretched, thick and accusing. I looked around at the changes she'd made. The minimalist art replacing family portraits, the new throw pillows that matched nothing Dad ever liked, and felt a surge of protectiveness for the house that had raised me. "This ends now," I said. "I'm moving back in. Tomorrow. You have 30 days to vacate the lake house and any personal items here. The company lawyers will handle the rest." Her face twisted. Shock, then fury. "You can't just throw me out. I'm his widow. Legally, yes. Practically, the will is clear. And the board will back it." Dad made sure of that. She stepped forward, voice dropping to a hiss. "You think this is over? You think you can waltz in and take everything he built? I was there for the late nights, the hospital stays, the decisions. You were at college, living off his money. The words cut, but not as deeply as they once would have. I was his daughter. Always. You were temporary. He made that clear in the end. Vivian's composure cracked then, tears finally spilling, mascara tracking black lines down her cheeks. He loved me. In his way. Maybe, I said quietly. But he loved me more. Enough to protect me from you. She turned away, shoulders shaking, and I left her there in the kitchen she'd once ruled, walking upstairs to my old bedroom where the walls still held faint pencil marks from my height chart, where Dad had tucked me in after nightmares and promised the world would always have room for me. I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching Mom's necklace, and let the grief come fully, waves of it crashing over me, mixing loss with a strange relief of vindication. Dad had seen her ambition, her quiet campaign to sideline me, and he'd acted quietly, decisively, the way he always did with business threats. The will wasn't revenge. It was love, written in clauses and trusts, ensuring I'd never have to fight for what was rightfully mine. Downstairs, Vivian's sobs echoed faintly. I didn't go to her. Instead, I called the lawyer, confirmed the timeline for probate and possession, then texted Mia, my college roommate who'd always been my anchor. Need a place to crash tonight. Long story. She replied instantly. Doors open. Wine's chilling. I packed a small bag, old photos I'd salvaged from Dad's desk before Vivian could, my favorite hoodie that still smelled faintly of his cologne, and left the house without looking back. That night at Mia's tiny apartment downtown, surrounded by takeout containers and her chaotic collection of plants, I told her everything. The barred funeral, the will, Vivian's unraveling. Mia listened, poured more wine, hugged me when the tears came again. He knew, she said simply. He always knew who you were to him. The next morning I returned to Elm Street with movers. Professional, efficient, no drama. Vivian had already started packing, boxes stacked neatly in the foyer, her face composed, but eyes hollow. We didn't speak beyond logistics. She signed the acknowledgement forms Hargrove had prepared, accepted the keys to the lake house, and left in a taxi with 2 suitcases and the dignity she could still muster. When the door closed behind her, the house exhaled, creaking floors settling sunlight flooding rooms that had felt dim for too long. I walked through every space, touching banisters Dad had sanded himself, opening drawers where his old letters and receipts still waited. In his study, now mine, I found a sealed envelope tucked behind a false panel in the desk drawer, my name on it in his familiar scrawl. Inside, a single page. Elena, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and Vivian's shown her true colors. You were always my first priority, my greatest accomplishment. The business is yours to grow or sell, your choice. But remember, wealth is only valuable if it serves love. Live big, love bigger. And if she fights, fight back harder. I already won for you. Love, Dad. Tears blurred the ink. I folded the letter carefully, placed it in my wallet like a talisman. The battle wasn't over. Probate would drag, Vivian would likely contest, lawyers would circle. But Dad had armed me. The house was mine. The company was mine. The love had always been mine. And as I stood in the empty study, afternoon light slanting across the desk where he'd built his empire, I felt the first stirrings of something new. Not just grief, not just anger, but power. The kind that comes when someone believes in you enough to protect you from the grave itself. Vivian had tried to erase me. Dad had made sure she never could. And now, with the will read, and the first battle won, the real story, of rebuilding, of claiming what was mine, of facing whatever she threw next, had only just begun. The days after Vivian's departure from the Elm Street house felt like walking through a museum after the exhibits had been quietly removed. Every room echoed with absence, the air still carrying faint traces of her perfume mixed with the lemon polish she'd insisted on using every week. I moved back in the very next weekend, hiring a small crew to help shift my college apartment furniture into the spaces that had once been mine, my old bedroom reclaimed with fresh linens and the posters I'd taken down years ago taped back up. Dad's study transformed into my command center where I spread out company financials and legal documents under the same desk lamp he'd used for late-night deal reviews. The lake house key sat on the kitchen counter like a taunt. Vivian had already packed her personal belongings there, leaving the place pristine but impersonal, every trace of Dad's fishing gear, and my childhood summer toys carefully boxed and labeled for Elena in her precise handwriting. I didn't go there yet. Couldn't face the memories without first securing what remained here. Probate moved slowly but inexorably. Hargrove kept me updated weekly, explaining each step in patient detail, asset inventories, creditor notifications, tax filings that made my head spin. Vivian contested almost immediately, filing a claim for undue influence and lack of capacity during the will's revision, arguing Dad hadn't been in his right mind after the first heart attack, that I'd somehow manipulated him into cutting her out. The accusation stung more than I expected. It painted me as the scheming daughter, not the grieving child Dad had protected. Hargrove dismissed it quickly in our first strategy meeting. We have medical records showing full mental competence, multiple witnesses to the signing, video of him reviewing the document. Her case is thin, emotional, not evidentiary. Still, the process dragged. Court dates scheduled months out, depositions looming like storm clouds. Vivian hired a high-profile estate litigator from the city, the kind who advertised on billboards and specialized in contested wills. Rumors filtered back through Dad's old colleagues that she was telling anyone who'd listen how the ungrateful daughter had stolen her rightful inheritance, how she'd been the one holding Richard's hand through the final months while I was off at school. The whispers reached me through mutual acquaintances, awkward texts from Dad's former partners asking if everything was okay, careful questions at the grocery store from neighbors who'd known us both. I kept my responses brief, professional. The will is clear. We're handling it through the courts. But inside the anger simmered. Vivian wasn't just fighting for money. She was fighting to rewrite history, to cast herself as the devoted widow wronged by the spoiled child. I threw myself into the business to keep the grief at bay. Hale Developments had been running on autopilot under the interim board Dad had appointed experienced executives who'd worked with him for decades, loyal to the name on the letterhead more than to any individual. They welcomed me cautiously at first, scheduling weekly briefings where I sat at the head of the long conference table Dad once dominated, absorbing reports on ongoing projects, cash flow, pending acquisitions. I wasn't ready to lead. Not yet. But I listened, asked questions, took notes in the same leather-bound planner he'd given me for high school graduation. The board respected my presence. More than one remarked how much I sounded like him when I challenged a budget overrun or pushed for sustainable building practices he'd always talked about but never fully implemented. He'd be proud, the CFO said after one particularly grueling meeting. He always said you had his head for numbers and your mother's heart for people. The words stayed with me, a quiet anchor amid the storm. Meanwhile, Vivian escalated outside the courtroom. Anonymous letters arrived at the office, typed, postmarked from the city, detailing supposed irregularities in my management, hinting at conflicts of interest, even suggesting I'd coerced Dad during his hospital stays. The board investigated each one, found nothing, but the effort drained resources and morale. Then came the social media campaign. Subtle at first, posts on local real estate forums questioning the sudden change in leadership at Hale Developments. Anonymous accounts spreading rumors that the daughter was never involved. Now she's cashing in on her father's legacy while the widow is left with nothing. I traced one back to an IP in Vivian's new apartment building. Hargrove issued a cease and desist the next day. She complied. For a week, then shifted tactics. Public appearances at industry events Dad used to attend, dressed in mourning black even months later, accepting condolences with practiced tears, telling anyone who asked that she was fighting for what Richard truly wanted. The pressure built. I lost sleep, woke in the middle of the night checking email for the next salvo, second-guessing every decision at work. One particularly brutal week, after a deposition where Vivian's lawyer grilled me for hours about my relationship with Dad, implying I'd influenced him during visits, I broke down in Hargrove's office afterward. She's trying to destroy me, I said, voice cracking. Not just take the money, erase me. Hargrove leaned back in his chair, calm as always. She's fighting because she knows she's losing. The will is airtight. The medical records are clear. We have affidavits from nurses who saw her pressure him to change beneficiaries even in the hospital. She's grasping. He slid a folder across the desk. But we have something stronger. Inside were emails, hundreds, between Vivian and Dad from the last year of his life. Hargrove had subpoenaed them during discovery. Dad's personal account, never shared with her, contained every message she'd sent trying to convince him to revise the will in her favor, promising a fresh start without the baggage of the past, suggesting I'd be generously provided for, but not given control. Dad's replies were consistent. Polite deflections at first, then firmer rejections. Elena is my legacy. She gets everything. End of discussion. The last email, sent 3 days before his final heart attack. Vivian, I've made my choice. Respect it. If you can't, we need to talk about separate lives. He'd never sent it to her. Draft saved. Never delivered. But it existed. Time-stamped. Undeniable. Hargrove watched me read, then spoke quietly. We don't have to use this publicly unless she forces our hand. But it ends her undue influence claim. She knew his wishes. She pushed anyway. Relief crashed over me, followed by fresh grief. Dad had been protecting me even in those final months, quietly, stubbornly, the way he always had. I closed the folder. Use it? I'm done letting her rewrite the story. The next court hearing came 2 months later. Vivian's team presented emotional testimony. Friends who said Dad had talked about providing for his wife. Colleagues who recalled him mentioning family changes. Then Hargrove played the emails. Projected on the courtroom screen, Dad's words clear and final. Vivian sat rigid, face pale as the judge reviewed the evidence. When he ruled, will upheld, contest dismissed with prejudice, her claims denied, she didn't cry. She simply stood, gathered her papers, and walked out without looking back. Outside the courthouse, rain had started. I stood under the overhang watching her disappear into a waiting car. No final confrontation, no last words, just the quiet click of a chapter closing. Back at the house that night, I opened a bottle of Dad's favorite scotch, poured 2 glasses, one for me, one left on his empty desk, and sat in the study surrounded by his books, his awards, his life. You won, I whispered to the empty room. We won. The empire was secure. The house was mine. And somewhere in the silence, I felt him smile. Proud, steady, finally at peace. But the real work, stepping into the role he'd prepared me for, leading the company he'd built, honoring the love he'd safeguarded, was only beginning. Vivian had lost the battle. Now it was time to claim the future he'd left me. The courtroom victory felt less like triumph and more like the end of a long fever dream. When the judge's gavel fell, dismissing Vivian's contest with prejudice and affirming the will in full, a hush settled over the room, broken only by the rustle of papers and the scrape of chairs as people stood to leave. Vivian remained seated for a long moment, staring at the table as if the wood grain held some final argument she could still win, then rose slowly, gathered her coat and purse with deliberate movements, and walked past me without a glance. Her lawyer murmured something about appeals, but even he sounded tired, the fire gone from his earlier bluster. Hargrove touched my elbow gently as we exited. It's over, Elena. The estate is yours to administer. Probate will close within the month. Outside the courthouse steps, rain had turned to sleet, stinging my cheeks as I stood under the overhang watching Vivian disappear into a waiting black car. Same driver she'd used for years, same tinted windows that had once ferried Dad to meetings. I didn't feel joy, only a hollow relief that the fight was done, that her attempts to rewrite Dad's final wishes had failed. Back at the Elm Street house that evening, I lit every lamp, turned on the gas fireplace Dad had loved despite Vivian's complaints about wasted energy, and sat in his study with the box of documents Hargrove had released to me. Bank statements, property deeds, company bylaws, all bearing Dad's signature and now mine as executor. The board had scheduled an emergency meeting for the following week to formally transfer control. Until then, I pored over balance sheets and project timelines, learning the empire piece by piece. Hale Developments wasn't just buildings, it was schools, affordable housing initiatives Dad had quietly funded, green retrofits he'd pushed through despite cheaper alternatives. Reading the notes he'd left in margins, questions about community impact, sustainability goals. I saw the man behind the mogul, the one who taught me to measure success not just in dollars but in lives improved. The first real test came sooner than expected. 2 days after the ruling, Vivian filed an emergency motion to freeze assets pending appeal, claiming irreparable harm to her lifestyle and potential dissipation by an inexperienced heir. The judge denied it within hours, citing the will's clarity and my demonstrated competence, but the publicity stung. Local business journals ran headlines like Widow Fights Daughter for Late Developer's Fortune, painting me as the cold inheritor and Vivian as the grieving spouse left destitute. Reporters called the house. I declined comment, but the damage spread. Old colleagues hesitated to return my calls. Suppliers asked for personal guarantees on pending projects. I felt the weight of Dad's legacy pressing down, the fear that one wrong move could tarnish everything he'd built. The board meeting arrived on a gray Thursday morning. I walked into the conference room at headquarters wearing the navy suit Dad had bought me for my college graduation, the same one Vivian had once mocked as too corporate for a girl. The directors, 7 seasoned professionals, most of whom had known me since I was small, stood when I entered, a gesture that caught me off guard. Miss Hale, the chairman said, your father spoke of this day often. We're ready when you are. I took the head chair, heart pounding, and opened the meeting with the only thing that felt honest. I'm not here to replace him. I'm here to honor him. Show me where we stand, and let's move forward together. The next 3 hours were grueling. Financial reviews showing solid reserves, but several projects delayed by permitting issues. A downtown redevelopment stalled by community opposition Vivian had quietly encouraged during Dad's illness. I listened, asked questions Dad would have asked, and by the end the room felt lighter, the board nodding with something like approval. We're with you, the CFO said as we wrapped. Your father chose well. Driving home that afternoon, I stopped at the cemetery, first time since the funeral I'd been barred from attending. Dad's plot was simple. Flat stone, his name beside Mom's, fresh flowers someone had left recently. I knelt in the damp grass, tracing the dates with my fingers. You saw it coming, I whispered. You protected me anyway. Tears came then, not the raw sobs of early grief, but something quieter, cleaner. When I stood, brushing dirt from my knees, I felt the shift. Grief still there, but no longer paralyzing. Strength had taken root in its place. Vivian didn't disappear entirely. She moved into a condo downtown, paid for by the stipend Dad had left, and began a quiet campaign of reinvention, charity luncheons where she spoke about widowhood and resilience, interviews with lifestyle blogs framing her as the supportive partner who'd stepped aside gracefully after a difficult probate. The narrative graded, graceful? She'd fought tooth and nail, but I refused to engage publicly. Instead, I focused inward, hiring a financial advisor to restructure trusts, meeting with community groups about the stalled redevelopment, slowly stepping into the role Dad had prepared me for. One evening, sorting through Dad's old files, I found a USB drive labeled for Elena. When you're ready. Plugging it in revealed video messages, dozens, filmed over the last 2 years of his life. In the first, he sat at this very desk, looking tired but smiling. If you're watching this, I'm gone, and you're probably neck deep in the business. First rule, trust your gut. Second, don't let anyone, not Vivian, not the board, not even me from the grave, tell you how to run it. It's yours now. Make it better than I did. I watched them all that night, tears and laughter mixing as he gave advice on negotiations, on people, on life. The last video, dated just weeks before his final attack. Elena, if Vivian's still around when this plays, know I tried to fix things. She wanted more than I could give without hurting you. I chose you. Always will. Love bigger than the empire, kiddo. That's the real legacy. I closed the laptop, sat in the dark study, and let the words settle. The next morning, I called Hargrove. Draft the papers. I'm taking full control early. No interim board. I'm ready. He paused, then said quietly, your father would be proud. The transition wasn't easy. More meetings, more scrutiny, more nights wondering if I was enough, but each step forward chipped away at Vivian's shadow. She faded from the headlines, from the industry circles, from the narrative. I heard through a mutual contact that she'd started dating again, someone in finance, and moved to a smaller city upstate. No more contests, no more whispers. The house on Elm Street filled again, not with her presence, but with mine. Friends over for dinner, the kids' laughter echoing when they visited from college someday, my own plans taking shape on the walls Dad had built. And every morning when I walked into the study and saw his photo on the desk, smiling, arm around a younger me, I felt the truth settle deeper. He hadn't just left me an empire. He'd left me the strength to claim it. Vivian had tried to bar me from his funeral, from his legacy, from belonging, but Dad had written my name at the top, and no one, Not even death could erase that claim. The future stretched ahead, wide and uncertain, but mine to shape. And for the first time since the hospital calls, since the locked doors and contested wills, I felt truly at home. The months following Vivian's defeat in court settled into a rhythm that felt both foreign and deeply familiar, like returning to a house you'd lived in as a child, only to find the furniture rearranged, but the bones of the place still the same. The Elm Street Victorian stood quiet and solid, its creaking floors and high ceilings no longer echoing with tension, but with the ordinary sounds of life reclaiming space. My footsteps on the stairs at dawn, coffee brewing in the kitchen where Dad used to read the paper, sunlight slanting across the study desk now covered in my own blueprints and financial projections instead of his. I kept his photo there, framed simply beside the monitor, a reminder every morning that this empire, now mine to steer, wasn't just bricks and mortar, but a promise he'd made to protect me even after he was gone. The company demanded everything. I moved into the executive suite at headquarters downtown, a glass-walled office overlooking the river where Dad had once stood to watch his buildings rise. The board had transitioned smoothly. Most members stayed, a few retired with generous packages, replaced by younger executives who brought fresh ideas about sustainable development and community partnerships. Things Dad had always talked about but never fully pursued amid the pressure of quarterly profits. I pushed those initiatives forward. Green certifications on new projects, affordable housing quotas in mixed-use developments, partnerships with local nonprofits to ensure displacement didn't follow progress. The changes drew praise from industry journals and quiet resentment from old guard contractors who preferred the faster, cheaper ways of the past. I didn't bend. We build for people, not just investors, I told the team in my first all-hands meeting, voice steadier than I felt. That's how Dad built it. That's how we keep building. The staff responded, some skeptically at first, then with growing loyalty. Late nights became routine. I'd stay until the building emptied, reviewing contracts under the same desk lamp Dad had used, finding his handwritten notes and margins. Check zoning impact. Community benefit first. They guided me like a compass when doubt crept in. Vivian, meanwhile, faded from the headlines but not from the periphery. She'd relocated upstate to a modest townhouse paid for by the stipend, started a small interior design consultancy catering to retirees, ironic, given how she'd stripped our house of warmth. Mutual contacts mentioned her in passing. She's doing okay, or saw her at a charity event. Still talks about Richard like they were soulmates. I didn't engage, didn't search her name, didn't let curiosity pull me back into her orbit. The restraining order had expired quietly. No violations, no renewed threats. Still, I kept the cameras at the house active, changed the gate code quarterly, maintained the habit of looking twice at unfamiliar cars in the driveway. Paranoia? Perhaps? Survival? Definitely. One crisp November afternoon, while reviewing bids for a downtown revitalization project, my assistant knocked. There's a courier here. Says it's personal. The envelope was thick cream stock, no return address, my name typed neatly on the front. Inside, a single sheet of paper, Vivian's handwriting unmistakable. Elena, I know the court's decided. I'm not fighting anymore, but there are things your father never told you. Things I kept for him. If you want the truth about why he changed the will so late, about what really happened in those last months, come to the lake house this Saturday at noon. I'll be there to hand over the last of his personal effects. No lawyers, no drama. Just closure, V. My pulse hammered as I read it twice. The lake house, Dad's favorite retreat, the place where he taught me to fish, where Mom's ashes had been scattered years before I was born. Vivian had owned it outright per the will, but the personal effects clause had always felt vague. I called Hargrove immediately. She's offering to return items. Is there any legal risk? He thought for a moment. If it's truly personal, letters, photos, sentimental items, she's obligated to return them anyway. But meet in public if possible, or bring a witness. Don't go alone. I didn't tell anyone else. Not the board, not my friends. This felt private, a final thread between me and the woman who tried to erase me. Saturday dawned cold and clear. I drove the familiar route alone, the highway winding past autumn forests blazing red and gold, memories rising with every mile. Dad's truck rattling over gravel, his voice singing off-key to old country songs, the smell of pine and lake water when we arrived. The house looked unchanged from the road, cedar siding, wraparound porch, the dock stretching into glassy water. But Vivian's car sat in the drive, a sleek silver sedan that looked out of place against the rustic setting. She waited on the porch steps, dressed simply in jeans and a cream sweater, hair pulled back, no makeup. No trace of the polished widow from the funeral. I parked, stepped out slowly, keys gripped like a weapon in my pocket. You came, she said, voice soft. I wasn't sure you would. I want whatever Dad left. She nodded, stood. It's inside. Come in. The house smelled of wood smoke and dust. She'd cleaned it, arranged Dad's things on the dining table, his fishing vest, tackle box. A stack of photo albums, a small wooden box I recognized from his study. Vivian gestured to them. These were always yours. He kept them here so I wouldn't interfere. I opened the box first, inside, letters from Mom to Dad before I was born, love notes he'd saved, a lock of my baby hair tied with ribbon, and at the bottom, a sealed envelope with my name in his handwriting dated the week after his first heart attack. I didn't open it yet. Vivian watched, expression unreadable. There's more, she said quietly. He recorded videos. For you. I found them after he died. I kept them, because I wasn't ready to let go. She handed me a USB drive. Everything's there. The last one, he filmed it the night before he passed. He knew. My throat tightened. Why give them to me now? She looked out at the lake, water rippling in the breeze. Because I was wrong. About a lot. I thought if I controlled the memories, I could control the legacy. I thought you were the obstacle. Turns out I was. She met my eyes then, no artifice left. I'm leaving the state next month. New start. I don't expect forgiveness. Just take what's yours. All of it. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I gathered the albums, the box, the drive. Thank you, I said finally, for returning them. She nodded once, stepped aside as I walked to the door. On the porch, I paused. The lake house. You can keep it. Sell it, live in it, whatever. It was never about the property. Her eyes widened slightly. You don't want it? I have the memories. That's enough. I drove away without looking back, the USB drive warm in my pocket. That night in the study, I plugged it in. Dad appeared on screen, thinner, grayer, but smiling. Elena, if you're watching this, I didn't make it. But listen, you're stronger than you know. The business is yours. The house is yours. Vivian. She means well, but she wants to be the center. Don't let her. You're the center. Always were. The last video ended with him looking straight at the camera. I love you, kiddo. Live big. Love bigger. I cried, then ugly, wrenching sobs that echoed through the empty house. But when they passed, something shifted. Grief still there, but lighter, shared with the man who'd never truly left. Vivian faded after that. Sold the lake house quietly, moved away, disappeared from the industry chatter. I didn't follow her path. I walked mine, expanding the company, honoring Dad's vision while building my own. The house on Elm Street filled with life again, friends over for holidays, future plans sketched on walls, the study no longer a shrine but a workspace where his photo watched over me every day. And every evening, when I sat on the porch swing watching stars appear, I felt him there, not in anger, not in loss, but in quiet certainty. He'd written my name at the top for a reason, and I was finally ready to live up to it. The lake house key felt heavier in my hand than it should have when I finally drove up there the following weekend, the gravel road crunching under tires the same way it had every summer of my childhood, the pines parting to reveal the cedar-sided cabin sitting quiet against the water like it had been waiting for me all along. Vivian had left it immaculate, floors swept, counters wiped, even the windows sparkling as though she'd spent her last hours there scrubbing away every trace of her presence. She'd taken her clothes, her cosmetics, the modern art she'd hung over Dad's objections, but she'd left everything that mattered. His fishing vest still hanging on the peg by the back door, the tackle box with lures he'd tied himself, the stack of photo albums she'd arranged on the coffee table like an offering. I walked through the room slowly, touching surfaces Dad's hands had touched. The worn arm of his favorite reading chair by the fireplace, the kitchen table where we played endless games of gin rummy on rainy afternoons, the dock where he taught me to cast a line in patience and equal measure. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of him. I sat on the porch, steps overlooking the lake, the water flat and silver in the late afternoon light, and opened the wooden box she'd returned. Inside, the letters from Mom to Dad before I was born, her handwriting looping across pages yellowed with time, words of love and hope that made my throat close. The lock of baby hair tied with pink ribbon, the hospital bracelet from my birth with Dad's shaky handwriting on the name tag. Elena Marie Hale, our miracle. And, at the bottom, the sealed envelope he'd written after his first heart attack. I broke the seal carefully, unfolded the single sheet. Elena, if you're reading this, I didn't beat the odds. But know this. Every choice I made in the last years was for you. Vivian pushed hard for changes that would have left you vulnerable. I saw her ambition grow faster than her love. She wanted security, control, the life she thought she deserved. I wanted you to have what I built, not because you're entitled, but because you're capable. You always were. The business, the house, the future. It's yours to shape. I don't let guilt or doubt steal that from you. And if she fights, remember? I chose you first, last, always. Live big, love bigger. I'm proud of you, kiddo. Always will be. Dad. The words blurred through tears I didn't try to stop. I sat there until the sun dipped low, painting the lake gold, letting grief and gratitude wash over me in equal measure. When the light faded, I went inside, built a fire on the stone hearth, and plugged in the USB drive Vivian had given me. Dad appeared on the screen, thinner in the later videos, but his eyes still bright. His smile still the one that had made everything feel possible. He spoke directly to the camera in each one, casual as if we were sharing coffee at the kitchen table. First project you take on, don't let the board steamroll you. They'll test you. Stand your ground. Another. About the lake house. If Vivian's still holding it, let her. Memories aren't in the deed. They're in you. The final one, filmed in his hospital room the night before he died, ivy lines snaking across his arm, voice weaker but steady. Elena, if I don't make it through tomorrow, no, I'm not afraid. I've had a good run, built something solid, loved a good woman once, then another who tried her best. But you're the best part. Take care of the company, but more important, take care of yourself. Don't let anyone make you smaller. You're bigger than any building I ever put up. I love you. Always. The screen went black. I sat in the dark cabin for a long time after, fire crackling low, lake lapping softly against the dock outside. When I finally stood, I felt something shift. Not the grief lifting entirely, but making room for something else. Purpose. The next week I returned to the city with the albums, the letters, the drive, physical proof that Dad's love hadn't died with him, that he'd guarded me even in silence. I called the board, scheduled a retreat at the lake house the following month. We're going back to basics, I told them. No suits, no projections. Just the place where Richard Hale started dreaming big. We'll plan the next decade there. They agreed, some surprised, most intrigued. Vivian sold the lake house quietly through a broker. The new owners, a young family from the city, moved in the following spring. I drove past once, saw children playing on the dock where I'd learned to fish, and felt no possessiveness, only quiet satisfaction that the place would hold new memories instead of old battles. The company grew under my watch, slower than Dad's aggressive expansion, but stronger in the places that mattered. Community buy-in, environmental standards, employee ownership programs that gave workers a real stake. Critics called it soft. Supporters called it visionary. I called it Dad's legacy, refined by the daughter he'd trusted to carry it forward. Vivian disappeared from public view after that. Last I heard through industry gossip, she'd remarried, a quiet man in finance, moved to a small town where no one knew her history. She never contacted me again. No more letters, no more shadows at the edges of my life. The restraining order expired unrenewed. The cameras at Elm Street eventually turned off when I realized I no longer needed them. The house filled with life again, friends over for barbecues on the back patio, holiday dinners where laughter echoed off walls. Vivian had once tried to claim, my own future taking shape in sketches taped to the study walls. New projects, travel plans, perhaps a family of my own someday. And every evening, when I sat in Dad's old chair by the fireplace with a glass of the scotch he'd loved, I felt him there, not as a ghost, but as a foundation. He'd written my name at the top when it mattered most, had seen Vivian's ambition for what it was, and chosen to protect the daughter he'd raised rather than placate the wife who wanted more. That choice had cost him peace in his final months, but it had given me everything. So I lived big, as he'd asked. Loved bigger, built better. And when doubt crept in on hard days, when a project stalled, when memories hit unexpectedly, I'd open the wooden box, read his letter again, watch one of his videos, and remember. He'd fought for me from the grave itself. The empire wasn't just buildings or balance sheets. It was trust. It was love. It was mine. Not because Vivian lost, but because Dad won. And as seasons turned and the house on Elm Street stood steady through another winter, I walked its halls knowing I belonged here. Not as an intruder, not as a claimant, but as the rightful heir to a legacy written in ink no one could erase. The story that began with a barred funeral ended not in revenge or bitterness, but in quiet, hard-won peace. Vivian had tried to take what wasn't hers. Dad had made sure it stayed where it belonged. And I, finally, fully, carried it forward. The lake house key felt heavier in my hand than it should have when I finally drove up there the following weekend, the gravel road crunching under tires the same way it had every summer of my childhood, the pines parting to reveal the cedar-sided cabin sitting quiet against the water like it had been waiting for me all along. Vivian had left it immaculate, floors swept, counters wiped, even the windows sparkling as though she'd spent her last hours there scrubbing away every trace of her presence. She'd taken her clothes, her cosmetics, the modern art she'd hung over Dad's objections, but she'd left everything that mattered. His fishing vest still hanging on the peg by the back door, the tackle box with lures he'd tied himself, the stack of photo albums she'd arranged on the coffee table like an offering. I walked through the room slowly, touching surfaces Dad's hands had touched. The worn arm of his favorite reading chair by the fireplace, the kitchen table where we'd played endless games of gin rummy on rainy afternoons, the dock where he taught me to cast a line in patience and equal measure. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of him. I sat on the porch, steps overlooking the lake, the water flat and silver in the late afternoon light, and opened the wooden box she'd returned. Inside, the letters from Mom to Dad before I was born, her handwriting looping across pages yellowed with time, words of love and hope that made my throat close. The lock of baby hair tied with pink ribbon, the hospital bracelet from my birth with Dad's shaky handwriting on the name tag. Elena Marie Hale, our miracle. And, at the bottom, the sealed envelope he'd written after his first heart attack. I broke the seal carefully, unfolded the single sheet. Elena, if you're reading this, I didn't beat the odds. But know this, every choice I made in the last years was for you. Vivian pushed hard for changes that would have left you vulnerable. I saw her ambition grow faster than her love. She wanted security, control, the life she thought she deserved. I wanted you to have what I built, not because you're entitled, but because you're capable. You always were. The business, the house, the future, it's yours to shape. I don't let guilt or doubt steal that from you. And if she fights, remember? I chose you first, last, always. Live big, love bigger. I'm proud of you, kiddo. Always will be. Dad. The words blurred through tears I didn't try to stop. I sat there until the sun dipped low, painting the lake gold, letting grief and gratitude wash over me in equal measure. When the light faded, I went inside, built a fire in the stone hearth, and plugged in the USB drive Vivian had given me. Dad appeared on the screen, thinner in the later videos, but his eyes still bright. His smile still the one that had made everything feel possible. He spoke directly to the camera in each one, casual as if we were sharing coffee at the kitchen table. First project you take on, don't let the board steamroll you. They'll test you. Stand your ground. Another, about the lake house. If Vivian's still holding it, let her. Memories aren't in the deed. They're in you. The final one, filmed in his hospital room the night before he died, ivy lines snaking across his arm, voice weaker but steady. Elena, if I don't make it through tomorrow, no, I'm not afraid. I've had a good run, built something solid, loved a good woman once, then another who tried her best. But you, You're the best part. Take care of the company, but more important, take care of yourself. Don't let anyone make you smaller. You're bigger than any building I ever put up. I love you. Always. The screen went black. I sat in the dark cabin for a long time after, fire crackling low, lake lapping softly against the dock outside. When I finally stood, I felt something shift. Not the grief lifting entirely, but making room for something else. Purpose. The next week I returned to the city with the albums, the letters, the drive, physical proof that Dad's love hadn't died with him, that he'd guarded me even in silence. I called the board, scheduled a retreat at the lake house the following month. We're going back to basics, I told them. No suits, no projections. Just the place where Richard Hale started dreaming big. We'll plan the next decade there. They agreed, some surprised, most intrigued. Vivian sold the lake house quietly through a broker the new owners, a young family from the city, moved in the following spring. I drove past once, saw children playing on the dock where I'd learned to fish, and felt no possessiveness, only quiet satisfaction that the place would hold new memories instead of old battles. The company grew under my watch, slower than Dad's aggressive expansion, but stronger in the places that mattered. Community buy-in, environmental standards, employee ownership programs that gave workers a real stake. Critics called it soft. Supporters called it visionary. I called it Dad's legacy, refined by the daughter he'd trusted to carry it forward. Vivian disappeared from public view after that. Last I heard through industry gossip, she'd remarried, a quiet man in finance, moved to a small town where no one knew her history. She never contacted me again. No more letters, no more shadows at the edges of my life. The restraining order expired unrenewed. The cameras at Elm Street eventually turned off when I realized I no longer needed them. The house filled with life again, friends over for barbecues on the back patio, holiday dinners where laughter echoed off walls. Vivian had once tried to claim, my own future taking shape in sketches taped to the study walls. New projects, travel plans, perhaps a family of my own someday. And every evening, when I sat in Dad's old chair by the fireplace with a glass of the scotch he'd loved, I felt him there, not as a ghost, but as a foundation. He'd written my name at the top when it mattered most, had seen Vivian's ambition for what it was, and chosen to protect the daughter he'd raised rather than placate the wife who wanted more. That choice had cost him peace in his final months, but it had given me everything. So I lived big, as he'd asked. Loved bigger. Built better. And when doubt crept in on hard days, when a project stalled, when memories hit unexpectedly, I'd open the wooden box, read his letter again, watch one of his videos, and remember. He'd fought for me from the grave itself. The empire wasn't just buildings or balance sheets. It was trust. It was love. It was mine. Not because Vivian lost, but because Dad won. And as seasons turned and the house on Elm Street stood steady through another winter, I walked its halls knowing I belonged here. Not as an intruder, not as a claimant, but as the rightful heir to a legacy written in ink no one could erase. The story that began with a barred funeral ended not in revenge or bitterness, but in quiet, hard-won peace. Vivian had tried to take what wasn't hers. Dad had made sure it stayed where it belonged. And I, finally, fully, carried it forward. The years after Vivian's quiet exit from the story unfolded with the gentle inevitability of seasons turning over the same landscape, spring bringing new green to the maple on Elm Street, summer filling the lake house with laughter from friends and colleagues who came for retreats, fall carpeting the yard in gold and crimson leaves that crunched underfoot like old promises finally kept. Hale Developments grew not into a sprawling conglomerate, but into something more deliberate, a company known as much for its conscience as its skylines, projects that balance profit with purpose, communities strengthened rather than displaced. I led with the lessons Dad had left in videos and letters. Trust your gut, build for people first, love bigger than the ledger, and the board that once questioned my readiness now deferred to me as naturally as they once had to him. The house on Elm Street remained my anchor. I never sold it, never renovated it beyond what felt right. Mom's cozy antique stayed alongside Dad's clean lines. The study desk still bore his faint coffee rings. And every holiday the dining room filled with people who mattered. Old friends from college, new colleagues who'd become family, the kids Lily and Noah brought home from their own lives. Lily graduated architecture school with honors. Her thesis project a sustainable community center inspired by Dad's early sketches. She joined the firm afterward. Not because I asked, but because she wanted to, her designs carrying the same quiet integrity he'd taught me. Noah pursued environmental science, spending summers at the lake house studying water quality and wildlife, turning the dock into a makeshift lab where he'd explain ecosystem balance to anyone who'd listen. They both carried pieces of him. Lily his eye for structure, Noah his patience with the natural world, and watching them grow into their own lives felt like the fullest circle Dad could have hoped for. Vivian never reappeared. No more letters, no more sightings, no final dramatic confrontation. Through occasional industry whispers I learned she'd stayed upstate, remarried quietly, started a small life coaching practice focused on reinvention after loss. Whether she found peace or simply learned to live with the consequences of her choices, I didn't know and eventually stopped wondering. The restraining order had long expired. The cameras at the house were disconnected years ago. Her shadow no longer stretched across my days. One crisp October afternoon, exactly 10 years after the will reading, I drove to the lake house alone. The new owners had sold it back to me the previous year, not out of sentiment but because they wanted a larger place for their growing family. I bought it without hesitation, not to reclaim territory but to preserve a space where memories still lived. The cabin looked the same. Cedar weathered silver, porch swing creaking in the breeze, dock stretching into water that reflected sky like glass. I walked the property slowly, touching the railing where Dad had leaned to watch sunsets, sitting on the steps where he'd told me stories about Mom and the future he wanted for me. Inside, I opened the wooden box that had traveled with me through every move: letters, baby hair, the pocket watch still ticking, the USB drive of his videos. I plugged it in one last time, sat on the floor in front of the fireplace as flames crackled low. Dad appeared on screen, younger in the early recordings, older in the last, thinner, grayer, but smiling that same steady smile. Alina, if you're watching this again, years have passed. I hope you're happy. I hope the business is thriving, but more than that, I hope you're living a life that feels full. Not just successful, full. With people who love you for you, not what you can give them. If Vivian's still in the picture, I hope you found a way to let her go without carrying her weight. And if you're alone right now, know this. You are never alone. I'm right here, always. In every building you put up, every decision you make, every quiet moment when you remember to look up at the stars and feel small in the best way. Fuck you, kiddo! Bigger than any empire. Keep going. The screen faded to black. I sat there until the fire burned down to embers, watching sparks drift up the chimney like tiny stars. Outside, the lake reflected twilight, water lapping softly against the dock. I walked out, stood at the water's edge, and spoke to the empty air the way I'd spoken to him so many times. You were right. About everything. I'm happy. I'm full. And I'm still building. The wind carried my words across the water, gentle and final. Back at Elm Street the next week, life continued its steady orbit. Board meetings where decisions felt easier now, dinners with Lily and Noah where stories overlapped and laughter filled spaces that had once held silence, quiet evenings on the porch swing watching the maple turn gold again. The house held all of us. Past and present, grief and joy, the man who'd written my name at the top and the woman who'd tried to erase it. Vivian had barred me from his funeral, certain I didn't belong. But Dad had opened the will and spoken my name first, loudest, clearest. And in doing so, he'd given me not just an inheritance but an identity no one could contest. I belonged. Always had, always would. So I lived that belonging every day, in the buildings that rose with purpose, in the relationships that grew without conditions, in the quiet certainty that love, when protected fiercely, outlasts every attempt to take it away. The story that began with a locked gate and a contested will ended not in revenge or bitterness, but in this simple truth. Some legacies are written in ink that no court can erase, no ambition can rewrite, no absence can diminish. Dad had chosen me first, and in every way that mattered, I chose him back. Every day, every project, every breath. The empire stood, the house endured, and I, finally, fully, belonged exactly where he'd always known I did.